time. We are approaching that 9 o'clock time. We asked that everybody would. Yes, it is 9 o'clock straight up. Good morning. We're going to try to move along as our schedule will demand our promptness. Before we get started with our routine of business for the day, we would like to take this moment to have, how many we got? Okay. Okay.
Well, listen, you can move forward without a quorum. You can't take any action.
Good, okay. Well, let's move forward until the quorum get here. Thank you. Before we get started with our agenda or opening day, yesterday was a very traumatic day in our city, and we lost some very special lives, and Johnny Cunningham and others, one of our sheriffs of Nash County. If we could pause for a moment of silence as we reflect upon them and their families. Let us bow, just for a moment of silence. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to the final day of our Rocky Mount City Council Retreat. I would like to reconvene this meeting after yesterday's recess at 4:14. As I reflect on yesterday's discussion, for too long, the working poor, Black and brown, and underserved community of people have been directed to the worst housing or no housing, and that need to change. In the words of the city manager of Asheville, this is not a local problem. It is a national problem and a national opportunity. And I'm urging us as key leaders in the city of Rocky Mount to all agree that all of our citizens deserve a community that we can set the table of equitable, stable, affordable, and desirable housing for all citizens. This is especially important for the most underserved, disenfranchised, and excluded population. We've had much robust discussion on affordable housing. The city manager and her staff have outlined a number of ways we can approach this issue. While this is the last day of the retreat, this discussion will not end here. The city manager has shared a call for action, particularly for the families who are living in emergency situations. Further, she has committed to present to us an implementation plan at our May Committee of the Whole meeting, which will outline more specifically the process, procedures, and recommendations so we can begin to develop our strategy and approach to ensuring affordable housing in our community. And I just want to celebrate the city manager and her staff for a job well done. Let's do so. And we cannot be more pleased with this commitment to action. Today's agenda, which include presentation on the policies and procedures we currently have and others we need to consider as we continue to focus on executing affordable housing in our community. Again, thank you for all your participation, both in person and virtually. Now we will hear from our facilitators, Dr. Angie and Dr. Val. Let's thank them as well. Great job, well done. Thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Good morning, everyone. Yes, that's some good energy for a Friday morning. Thank you for that. Dr. Val, and to those on via a virtual participation, good morning to you. Good morning. I will be brief and yet remind us one last time that safety is our first and foremost priority. We have observed and participated in some very COVID conscious behaviors throughout the time we've been here. So let's continue those practices. Again, for any emergency evacuation or issues, we would rely on Ken Hunter to lead us out and rely on me to make that call, and we will respond accordingly. And the same would apply for any shelter in place or active shooter incidents, which we are so grateful to be in a safe place. This morning, we are going to proceed. We have a couple of presentations that we will start out with that will help to, as Mayor Pro Tem said, set the table for today. And I think more actions around the role of the staff. We're really looking forward to hearing from the Rocky Mount experience this morning. My co-facilitator, Dr. Val, will be facilitating and following Mayor Pro Tem's direction around any discussion that we have. We are asking everyone to stay focused and timely so that we can close on time. So many of us, I believe, are traveling back to our origins later today. And so we definitely want to be conscious of that. At the same time, we want to make sure we keep the focus and engagement, because today's presentations will allow us to be able to get that information that the city manager and her team will need in order to meet their deliverable for the May Committee of the Whole meeting. So with that said, we will follow protocol, and Mayor Pro Tem has stepped out. Do you want? Okay, so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Val. And Val, if you want to kick off a minute or two, and then we'll invite that next team up. If Mayor Pro Tem is not in the room at that time, Dr. Val, you do have the approval to introduce that group.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you for this last day of this retreat, and I'm excited to hear the Mayor Pro Tem discuss the fact that the next steps will be the presentation of an implementation plan and that this is ongoing work. We speak about learning, making this kind of change as an ongoing process. And I think the city manager spoke about that also, like a journey. And as I was reflecting again on the last 2 days and the conversation the council is having, the theme of equity it requires that guideline of both and thinking. And so as you're listening today to the Rocky Mount experience from the staff, I really want you to try on. I loved that Peter's talked about inviting you to try on. I'd like you to try on the ways in which the solutions to the issue of housing are both institutional and personal. And at the institutional level, the historic inequities cannot be ignored. And so the challenge for the council is, how do we do that in a way that creates both and, that does make Rocky Mount a place that everyone can be successful? And that is easier said than done. So the work ahead will be work at the personal and institutional level to hold that both and. And that's what I hope that we can continue to support you all in moving forward. And we've gotten a lot of really great action steps from this retreat so far that I think will be useful for that. So I want you to keep in mind that both and thinking, and keep in mind the idea that when we're talking about this change, it's both personal and it's institutional. I'm thinking, I think that's all I want to say for now. And as we move on into the session, I'll add more as it makes sense. So, Mayor Pro Tem, would you introduce?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Val. At this
I'm
time,
giving it back to you.
yes, at this time, Rocky Mount experience real deep in developmental services and staff were presented this time.
All right, good morning, everyone. Good morning. It's Friday. We've heard a lot of great things. I want to echo what the Mayor Pro Tem just said. Thanks to everyone. Thanks to everyone here, mayor, council, leadership, everybody in front of the house, behind the house, everybody making sure this has worked well. And I was thinking about, some of the great presentations we've had, and Dr. Batts asked a question to a majority of everyone in here yesterday. It was, what saying impacted you the most? Now, I'm going back to City Manager Campbell when she was giving her wonderful presentation, and what I wrote down probably a few times and starred and bulleted and dog-eared was, seize the moment and just do it. So that's why we're here. We're learning some great things. And she also mentioned that as far as community building in Asheville and everywhere else, it's all hands on deck. And you've seen that. You've seen a majority of departments represented here this last week and today. And she also said, sometimes we've got to get out of our own way. We have some things that are tripping us up. Be thoughtful and also innovate. It says, I hear innovate. It drew me to the City of Rocky Mount vision. It's to excel in municipal service, performance, and innovation. So that's what we're trying to do. I'm also excited too that the presentations kicked off Wednesday by the city manager of Asheville, who was a practicing planner for a number of years. So I appreciate Rochelle and everyone setting the agenda so a planner would start and a planner would follow on the last day. So Ken, next slide. So I want to introduce our team of development services. It's comprised of 3 divisions. And our goal today is to describe to you who we are, what we do, what we're seeing, what trends we're seeing in Rocky Mount, what we've done, and what we can do. So within those 3 divisions, planning, inspections, and community code, we have a wonderful team Joseph Bo Cook is our planning administrator. In inspections, Justin Floyd is our inspections administrator. And community code, we have Kelly Cook is our community code administrator. And the way they're represented is sort of the progress and process of development services. So planning essentially is that vision and the guidance and policy that we put in place. So as we receive and review items, and then they eventually get built. And that's where inspections comes in, through all the trades, building, mechanical, plumbing, electrical, as things progress and get built. And community code deals with the absolute built environment. So the end of that process. So as you can see, it's kind of a life cycle. Planning, we think about it, we see it, we receive it, we review it, analyze it, make recommendations, things happen, they get built. And then community code addresses some of the things you've heard this week, some blight, nuisance, and other things. So again, we're going to tie this all in with the City of Rocky Mount mission. Well-being, safety, and quality of life is kind of what we do. And we're in there, current and long range. But also we're in that balance of, we have to regulate, right? But we're also a resource. And so being here, being able to listen to hear what Asheville's doing, the Community Land Trust, all that, able to figure out what other resources, and hearing from members of the audience too. So again, with Ken and Jason's presentation yesterday about boards and commissions, just want to highlight here that some of our responsibilities lie with the planning board as things progress. Go to the planning board, they go to city council. We have the board of adjustment to make deviations to density and other numerical requirements in the code. Historic preservation in our historic preservation districts, then also our community appeals board. Thanks. So give you an idea of what we do, what we cover. Our city code is pretty large. I know it's either, usually at council, it's pretty close to Pam and Jep. It's a pretty large document. But within that, we focus on buildings and building regulations, health, sanitation, nuisances with the community code. And we do the housing code also. And then the largest is that land development code. And so there's regulations, there's zoning, there's use standards. And Joseph's going to get into that in a minute. Dimensional standards, development procedures. And what Rochelle mentioned yesterday is about the strategic plan and a lot of things that we have. It's a living document. That's why we're here. We can modify it. We can revise. We can make changes as we see what's happening. So piggyback off that, City Manager Campbell also was mentioning, you can go about this incrementally as long as you're responsible stewards of resources in our citizens' lives. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it over to Kelly Cook, our community code administrator.
Would you test the mic just to make sure that you're speaking directly into it? It's a little muffled for those of us on Zoom. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Kelly Cook. I'm the community code administrator for the city of Rocky Mount.
You need to speak closer to the mic. Thank you.
You can hold it, yeah.
Is this better?
Yep.
Good morning. Thank you for having me again. I'm Kelly Cook. I'm the community code administrator for the city of Rocky Mount. It's a pleasure to be back in Asheville, North Carolina. It's been several years since I've been back. My wife and I lived here about 23, 24 years ago. I can only say that boy, has it changed. Before we get into the nuts and bolts, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what my division, what my folks do, what we try to accomplish for the city. The Community Code Division ensures compliance with the city's minimum housing code, the public nuisance ordinances, which include grass and weeds, nuisance vehicles, and other nuisances which adversely impact the health, safety, and well-being of our customers and the appearance of the neighborhoods. The division includes 6 inspectors. Each of these are responsible for an assigned geographic area within the 44 square miles of the city. The division is also responsible for the city's integrated pest management program, and we have a very well-established and highly regarded vector control program staffed with 3 individuals. In layman's terms, we assist property owners and residents of the city with rodent issues, and we do our best to control the mosquito population in the city. And behind the scenes and dealing with most of the customers who call into the office are 2 of the best administrative professionals I've ever had the opportunity to work with. Of the approximately 26,000 housing units within the city, at the present time, there are approximately 733 that are not in compliance with the minimum housing code. When we deal with a minimum housing code case, I'll just walk through that process briefly if I can. When we conduct a minimum housing code inspection, part of that inspection includes an estimate to bring that house up to a minimum housing standard. That is the cost to repair it, the cost to bring it up to that minimum standard. To that end, we use that estimate and the tax value of the structure to come up with a percentage. That percentage is a threshold. We categorize our housing code inspections in 2 ways. They're either deteriorated or dilapidated. Deteriorated property is a house that can be brought up to the minimum housing standard at a cost of less than 40% of the tax value of the structure. A dilapidated property is that property which may require more than 40% of the tax value to bring it up to a minimum standard. At the current time, approximately 403 of the 733 houses under code in the city are considered deteriorated, and approximately 330 of those are considered dilapidated. Only properties that are classified or categorized as dilapidated will ever be considered for demolition at some point down the road. It's important to remember that. When we deal with deteriorated properties, when we deal with dilapidated properties, each one of these cases is processed through a legal notice of complaint and a hearing. And at that hearing, we will issue either an order to repair in the case of a deteriorated property. We will issue an order to repair or to demolish in the case of a dilapidated property. These both go to the deeded owner of the property as recognized by the Register of Deeds office. This fiscal year, we've initiated 55 new housing cases, and 61 existing housing code cases have been closed. In the past 3 fiscal years in the city of Rocky Mount, this number has decreased 75%. 4 years ago, in 2017, as Nash and Edgecombe County both performed their 7-year cycle of property tax assessments, we were put in a position we had to review about 30% of the existing cases we had on file at the time. This was due to property tax revaluations or property tax changes in the value. At the time, we had approximately 1,000 housing code cases, 900 and something housing code cases that were open. It was such a labor-intensive effort that what we did was we stepped back and we reevaluated our inspection practices from both an operational and an administrative perspective. We took advantage of some of the existing technology we have within the city. We enhanced our dispatch process, streamlined response times, and refocused our energy towards a customer service-based operation. Even during the past year, during the COVID pandemic, which resulted in stay-at-home orders, school closures, and more people were staying at home, we anticipated we would receive a lot more calls and be involved in a lot more minimum housing code cases. Curiously, the opposite has taken place. That number is drastically lower than it was last year. For the 3rd consecutive year, we've seen a major decrease in the number of housing code cases. This map, because of the size of the city, this chart will show you the green and yellow dots. These represent where every house that's under code in the city is at the current time. The highest concentrations of dwellings which are currently not in compliance with the minimum housing code are found in Southeast Rocky Mount, Holly Street, which is in the eastern part of the city, Happy Hill, northwest of downtown, and Little Raleigh, just west of downtown. Of course, these are some of the among the oldest neighborhoods in the city, which adds to that. I mean, we're not going out to West Haven and putting houses under code. There's some neighborhoods here that we're just not seeing or receiving calls and complaints on. These neighborhoods also represent a much higher number of rental properties in the city than most of the other neighborhoods in the city. In the past 5 years, the city has effected 39 demolitions. 21 of those properties were in a dilapidated state, and typically these are structurally unsafe or compromised. 18 of those demolitions were a result of fire or catastrophic damage, such as a tree, major storm damage, or flooding. This is fairly typical of a given year when it comes to demolitions in the city. We typically have anywhere between 6 to 8 house fires in the city that will destroy a property that would require a demolition at some point. Over the course of the last 7 years, the cost of demolition for a dilapidated dwelling has increased from about $5,500 up to about $7,500 this fiscal year. Fire damaged properties, storm damaged properties, or structurally compromised properties, demolition costs have increased from $10,000 to about $11,000 thus far this year. The reason for this is whenever the city effects a demolition, we're required to do an asbestos inspection, and that asbestos containing material needs to be removed from the property before demolition can take place. In the case of fire damaged properties, structurally compromised properties, those properties that are relatively unsafe to go into, we won't send the city inspectors in to do that asbestos inspection. Therefore, the entire dwelling has to be demolished as what they call asbestos containing material. It's an on-site demolition. The whole property has to be considered as though it does have asbestos in it. I'd like to speak with you briefly about manufactured home developments located in the city. While these represent less than 5% of the housing inventory in the city, there are 15 manufactured home developments within the city of Rocky Mount. These dwellings are not considered any different. They fall under the same minimum housing code as does any other dwelling in the city. From a legal perspective, they present a little bit more of a challenge to us in that we have to, whenever we do these whenever we initiate these cases, we initiate a title report and we have to identify all the parties in interest, which in the case of a manufactured home development, you may have a landowner, you may have a second party who owns a trailer, and then you've got a third party who's a tenant. So this presents a challenge. The second challenge that we face is manufactured home developments are located on private property, as is any house. However, it's typically on a much larger parcel of land, which are accessed via private roads. And if we cannot plainly see that there's an issue with a particular property, we don't have right to entry to that property because it is a privately maintained road. We have to have cause or complaint to enter that property. Cause being an ordinance or violation in plain sight from the public right-of-way, in which case the inspector can then enter. But without that complaint call, without that notification, we can't simply drive onto private property to seek out a violation. Another one of the challenges that we face with mobile home or manufactured home developments is the infrastructure within these developments. The roads, again, are privately owned and privately maintained, some of them not very well maintained. And those provide a challenge because we provide a lot of municipal services to those properties, such as solid waste disposal, public utilities such as electrical power. We also have a few of these developments, which are what we call master metered for water. In other words, there's one water main entering the property with one meter attached to it, and each individual space has its own water connection to it. One of the more common complaints that we have in manufactured home developments are plumbing issues. When the Community Code Division follows through and completes the legal process, conducts a hearing, issues the orders as necessary to bring a dwelling into compliance with the minimum housing code, and that property then becomes, at some point, on average of about 4 to 5 years, becomes eligible for demolition and is going to be considered as eligible for demolition. We compile a file on that particular dwelling that contains photos, tax and lien information, code violation history, owner information, when it was last occupied, how long the property's been vacant, number of police and fire calls for service, and any notes of significant or substantial structural issues with the property. We provide this information to Community Business Development for their consideration as a property acquisition, or as they see fit to include in their development plans. In other words, we don't affect a demolition without notifying or at least making them aware that there's a property out there, whether or not they may be interested in it for an acquisition, or for whatever use, if they're working with other properties in the adjacent area. Approximately 20% of the 733 dwellings that I mentioned to you, which are currently not in compliance with the minimum housing code, are owned by about 6 individuals or entities within the city. Virtually all, with a very small exception, I think we found 2 or 3 in the last couple of weeks. All of these properties are vacant. All of these dwellings are vacant. Not all of them are eligible for demolition at this point. However, we all know that the longer that a dwelling sits vacant and unused and it's not breathing and it's boarded up, the more it continues to dilapidate over time. As Jason mentioned yesterday, Greensboro being the pilot program, being the guinea pig, and everybody's watching them to see what happens with the receivership program. The gentleman who's administering that program in the city of Rocky Mount's a close professional friend of mine, and I stayed in touch with this. I am monitoring their receivership program as it moves forward, so that we may see how that might work as a viable alternative for the city of Rocky Mount. Can I appreciate your time?
Thank you, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. I am Joseph Bocook, Planning Administrator for the Development Services Department. One of 3 divisions, as Will mentioned, within the department. I'm pleased to be here this morning speaking with you all about affordable housing concerns. In my tenure with the city, through our community engagement for different planning processes, it has absolutely been a recurring theme that the city has issues with housing, and those issues need solutions. Over the course of this retreat, throughout the presentations, we've heard that it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's no silver bullet to address the concern. The planning division, our role in addressing affordable housing is through regulation, putting regulations in place that allow for housing choice, housing options within Rocky Mount. So in analyzing the current situation with housing, from a planning perspective, we identified a few opportunities, some threats, challenges. When you talk about housing in Rocky Mount, when you consider the economies of scale for development, really multifamily is the best option forward. However, not many of the city's zoning districts allow for multifamily. And I'll touch on that more in depth in a moment. We have 8 residential zoning districts. One of those allow multifamily. We have 5 commercial districts, and the only one that allows residential development at all is within the central business district downtown. So again, single-family developments, new subdivisions, they require large tracts of land. Land is scarce. You know, the city, as Kelly mentioned, has 44 square miles. In many cases, new development is occurring on the far extremes of the city. So that's putting a strain on city's resources with needs to extend infrastructure. Also, things that are beyond our control at the city level, but definitely a factor, are the cost of land, the cost of labor, construction materials. The one thing that we can control, however, are the city's regulations, ensuring that what we require does not add unnecessary burden to the cost of development and ultimately our ability to see more affordable housing come online in Rocky Mount. Again, through planning, while we are largely an advisory profession, our task with the city is to put regulations in place for development. Will mentioned the Land Development Code. It's an extensive document. In there, one of the main things is zoning. The first 2 things on this chart are use regulation and density regulation. Both of those are tools of zoning. With respect to design regulations, we're limited, especially when it comes to residential development. The only place that you can impose design standards, architectural standards on residential development are within local historic districts. And this is, regulated by general statute at the state level. The city does have 4 local historic districts, as you all are familiar with. Edgemont District, Villa Place District, the Rocky Mount Mills, and the Central City area, downtown. So three of those 4 are largely comprised of residential development, and then Central City downtown being a mix of commercial and other uses. Process regulation. Again, within the Land Development Code, we have standards for how the development process works in Rocky Mount. The state has statutes that largely control that, but with those things that we are able to adjust, I would say that we do well and move things through probably a little more expeditiously than other municipalities, both of comparative size and larger. The last thing is minimum housing, which Kelly has spoke on in depth. Next. All right. This image represents different styles of residential development. I mentioned that the city has 8 residential zoning districts and only 1, the R6 MFA district, allows for multifamily development. Across the country, cities are trying to come to grips with what is considered the missing middle housing, which consists of duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes, townhomes, live-work units. The R6 MFA district in Rocky Mount comprises 8% of that 44 square mile of our land area, our jurisdiction. So with that, the opportunity to have these multifamily housing developments, which I mentioned, given the cost of development and economies of development, is really limited. The state, there's a bill being considered through the state legislation right now that I must mention, that they're proposing cities would be forced to require this middle housing in all residential zoning districts. I'm not sure how that will go, but in Rocky Mount, one option we've considered or have given thought and will put forth is perhaps allowing for the middle housing within our commercial zoning districts. Many of our commercial districts are located along major corridors that have, where we have fixed transit routes with Rocky Mount Transit, as well as, like I mentioned earlier, downtown. This image here gives you an idea of the new residential permits over the past 5 years. It's been up and down. What you'll see, that bar, the line at the top represents single-family development, and it's far outpacing multifamily, other than in 2017 when we saw new units come online through the Ravenwood development on the southwest Little Raleigh area of the city. When you look at 2021, through the first 3 months of the year, we've seen the number of residential permits trending up. So what you see on the graph does represent a projection through the end of the year, but I would anticipate we'll get there. On the development review side of things, we are seeing many subdivisions that were approved in the past come back for reapproval, and new subdivisions that are being proposed. Again, so on this slide, this just represents the different housing types that exist in Rocky Mount at present. Single-family units represent almost 70%. Multifamily is a little less than 30%. And then manufactured homes, about 3%. Will's going to come back up and talk about recommendations that we've thought through, different policies that can be adjusted to, again, try to address affordable housing through regulation. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Joseph. Based on the presentation headed up by Madam City Manager yesterday, along with Ken and Jason and their hard work, we're going to go into some of the items that we have completed based on the information that we have from that draft plan. So what we have for sure is we do have some barriers and exclusions, but there's some that we don't have. And that would be, some communities have minimum square footage requirements for particular uses, and that excludes, for example, if you make it multifamily, has to have 1,000 square foot minimum or 1,500 square foot minimum. Some houses are smaller than that, right? Jason covered it really well, and even individuals here in Asheville, the accessory dwelling unit amendment that we put together to remove some of those barriers and exclusions. And in specific areas in downtown, we reduced and eliminated off-street parking as a requirement. And what that does, essentially, when you require X amount of numbers per unit, you require more space and parking in some instances when those spaces or that square footage could be used for additional units. We also have an area in the code in our LDC that allows for adaptive reuse of properties. We've seen that with Rocky Mountain Mills, how that has adapted and evolved. Some of the planning division responses to the strategic plan include taking a look at potentially lowering our minimum lot sizes. And currently the lowest is in that R6 MFA at 6,000 square foot. Asheville and their group has done smaller lot sizes with the Community Land Trust. Eliminate parking standards. So think about some of those larger tracts of land where parking dominates the area. And Joseph mentioned allowing residential development in commercial zones, allowing duplexes and triplexes potentially in single-family zoning, and to speed up the process in some cases, ensure that desirable projects that we want to see can occur as of right. And what I mean by that is a lot of things that we see in review have to come through staff level, have to go to a board level, have to go to a council level. So again, that's just another option that we can look if that's something that you're interested in. So again, some additional, just some considerations. To be effective, we have to look at all these incentives, including density bonuses, expedited review. We have some processes now. We have Builders Express and Express Plan Review. There is potentially an entry-level barrier to those as far as cost. So Paul D'Angelo mentioned the other day incentives up front. We can do fee rebates, expedited review. Again, it should be prioritized to construct affordable units and encourage that type of development. Again, careful collaboration with proximity to amenities, services, all within that neighborhood context and what you like, what you see, what you want to feel to achieve our equity goals. So with that, you can look at our density bonus. We have one zoning district that allows you to modify, but again, that has to go through a process. So we don't have that just available right off top. And Asheville has the density bonus, which allows in incentivizing you to produce and develop affordable units. Increase building multifamily housing near transit stations and transportation corridors. We have eliminated the requirements of allowing only owners and family members and caregivers to be in accessory dwelling units. Felt like that was a barrier and exclusionary. And we've heard in the last couple presentations about tax lien foreclosure. We'll investigate receivership more, as there's only one in the state. Working on that right now. And again, revising minimum parking standards to encourage mixed-use development and more sustainable use of land. So our recommendations, we can analyze through various departments in collaboration, all hands on deck, the vacant land suitable for development. We do have some constraints, not as similar to Asheville's topography, but we have some flood restraints in our area. Some voluntary incentive zoning and geographic boundaries. Jason mentioned, we should have incentives, but we need to probably focus on where geographically we want those. Density bonus for affordable units, we've heard that basically all week. Administrative flexibility, so allow us and staff to make adjustments for existing lots. A lot of the smaller areas where we have that concentration of the older housing stock, sometimes when those are deteriorated, dilapidated, they go away. It's very hard to build that back with our existing standards. So if we had a little bit of flexibility in there to modify our land development code so things can be built back in the same spot, so the context of the street and the view is very similar to what you would see today. So we have houses closer to the street in some areas, but if we apply this literally, in a lot of cases, a lot of those houses would have to be further back. They may be smaller, they may be taller. Just looking at things and how that could shape a neighborhood or change the character of a neighborhood. So Madam City Manager also mentioned these amendments for more and varied housing choices, expanding housing choice, being thoughtful and strategic in our approach. And finally, our proposal, based on best practices, Development Service can compile this information based on what you want us to advance with to allow for that greater housing choice. We can present these to committee of the whole meetings, our various community agencies and groups that we're currently working with, along with our boards and commissions, interested groups, of course. Those changes will have to go through the planning board and then ultimately city council for their recommendation. So again, that feedback from the work sessions and things we've heard here to develop those specific revisions and current regulations, we can produce our draft. I like the words that Jason used yesterday, provide a menu of options for you to choose what you would like to see based on our community, because we know what our community wants. Our community tells us what they want, and we can process that and work through that. So that's all we have. Thank you.
May I speak now? I want to follow the protocol.
Sorry about that. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering if we want to take any questions or comments at this point, or do you want to keep moving on?
We do have a break after this. Yes, that's a question. Before we take the question, I do want to say that Councilman Blackwell did have a family emergency that he had to leave for. Just want to say that. And at this time, yes, we can. Questions?
Thank you. This is Gloria Davis. I would like some clarification or explanation on one of the strategic plan items is eliminate minimum parking standards. Then the other one, eliminate the current eligibility requirement for allowing only owners, family members, and potential caregivers to occupy an accessory dwelling unit. And of course, the other one still revise the minimum parking requirements for residential and mixed-use development. What is the requirement now, or what is the, and I'm asking this question because we do have issues with lots and lots of cars parked in at some houses and lawns and residences, and there are issues where there are subleasing, and so I just wanted those things kind of clarified to your strategic planning process.
Yeah, absolutely. Ms. Davis, thank you so much for those questions.
Could you repeat the question, please, for those on Zoom?
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that great comment. So Ms. Davis asked about the parking standards and reducing the requirement in some areas. But her second question was related to accessory dwelling unit amendment that we proposed because there was an eligibility requirement in there currently. So go back to parking standards. Essentially, when you look at downtown as being our the heartbeat of the city, the way downtown's developed, you had buildings to the street, they're connected, and what has happened is there are parking requirements, and it's very specific as you go across. 1.5 to 2 spaces per unit. Now, if you get into the commercial side of it, it's per seats. For a church, it's per, so there's just a lot of, and it also depends on square footage. But if you drive around anywhere and look at a lot of the new development, parking takes up a majority of the land. And what planners and others have said in the most recent years is if you can reduce or minimize or set a maximum parking, you get more buildable area. So a lot of our regulations limit the size of things and could limit units and affordability in the long run if you're required to put so much land set aside for open space and parking. So with your second question, the accessory dwelling units, so we had it in the code. A lot of people don't even have it in their code at the moment, and it was in the code, so it was allowed, subject to meeting all these requirements, that it be a relative of yours, a caregiver. So if you wanted to, you own your house, you have an accessory dwelling unit, you could not rent that out to anyone outside of your family nucleus, essentially. So removing that barrier may allow for additional housing opportunities for people that need an affordable unit, additional income potentially for the homeowner, and it opens up the access. So a comment was made yesterday afternoon, and we talked about parking, and this is Dr. Nelson Robinson actually was mentioning about all the cars parked in the front of the house in the neighborhood. So you have those other regulations, but if we had availability of other units in other places you open up, and you may be able to, I won't say that it would eliminate that, but you open up spaces for people that might need an affordable unit. Again, we wouldn't regulate the size of that. There'd be other dimensional standards. I hope that clarified some of that for you. Okay, any other questions?
So just to clarify, we do have another delegate question. I just want to remind the audience in the room, our participants and/or participants on virtual, if you have questions, feel free to write them in the chat, and/or if you're in the room and you'd like to pass them to me, we will seek Mayor Pro Tem's guidance on that, but we do have another delegate that has a question for you, Will. This is Delegate Pope.
Thank you. This is Hubert Pope. First of all, I just want to say to our mayor and all our city council and all other departments, I think you guys have done an awesome job with this retreat, and especially with your details as far as what you have in your book. Just want to make a statement as far as business owner and developing other properties. I would like to make sure that as far as the inspections goes, and trying to assist builders, that we, especially when they're trying to be creative and create things as we see in other cities, that we be as lenient, and you guys have worked with people as much as possible to try to make that a smooth transition so we can have a creative city in downtown Rocky Mount and see something as we see in other cities. I would greatly appreciate that.
Thank you. One second.
Councilman Dalton.
Okay, thank you. Will, I appreciate the presentation and Kelly and Joseph. The parking right now, we don't have, there's no required parking for downtown, so obviously this would go into, you would expand that to further out. Would that also include commercial? Because you hit on a little bit of the commercial. Is that citywide or just just in a certain geographic area that you're thinking about proposing? And also, I think it was yesterday, the mayor brought up about Wilson. I would like, Madam Manager, for us to get some details on what our transit usage is now, because I do like that idea, because I think we could be more flexible and have better service to our folks if maybe we looked at a few things. I don't know how that sits, but one concern I do have about the accessory dwellings is, one thing, we got to give deference to people who purchase property existing and opening that up. And how do you handle, situations where there's rentals out there and so forth, and I've actually received a complaint, I think, on a Airbnb, and how's that handled? I mean, what do you do about that? Can you do anything once you open the door up for that? And then, but I'm curious about because if we're going to look at parking for the residential piece and bring that into the commercial piece, because that is an impediment for businesses currently, because there's so much between the stormwater runoff as well as parking and we've got limited space within the city. We've got a lot of properties in the just outside the central business district that could be developed, but that is an impediment there. So is it going to be expanded commercial as well, or suggestion?
I'm sorry to jump in, Will. Council member, would you please make sure you bring the mic closer? The challenge is not audibility in the room.
Sure.
It's on Zoom. Will, can you repeat that question
Yeah.
for those on Zoom, please?
I will try and summarize as best as I can. Councilman Daughtry's made some comments about parking standards and reducing those, and the cost of providing open space and the other costs that are stormwater requirements and everything. So would we be looking to expand into commercial areas of the city? And then part two, concern about accessory dwelling units and rental, I'm going to say registration or some kind of how do we handle those types of issues when they become more rental, Airbnb, VRBO type? Is that summarize that fairly well?
It does, but also when you go purchase a property, say we're talking about a lot of historic and older parts of our city, or just any part of our city, you live there for 20, 30, 40 years, and then all of a sudden the city comes through and changes the zoning and what's allowed, the fairness to the existing homeowners who are there. And what happens when the dynamic changes and issues come up? How do you handle those issues? It's just like when you've got issues now, there's some things that we as a city can regulate, but there's also other things, there's limitations of what we can do. One of the things that astounds me is in Kelly's presentation, 6 owners represent 20% of all the housing code cases. Obviously, there's an impediment what we can do, but that goes also into the rental piece. So that's why I asked the question. And not assuming or presuming that just because a rental is there that there's going to be problems, but you got to prepare for everything as best you can.
Right. So you're adding a unit, and this is fairly new for a lot of communities. You're adding another unit where it is typically one single family house, right, or stock. So a lot of people are now building garages with apartments above for family members, but the idea is to open that up to others, potentially an income stream or otherwise. Now, A lot of communities are dealing with rentals. I'm going to take an educated guess and say Asheville is dealing with a lot of rental, regulations and how do you enforce those, because they're there for a day or two and they're not as committed long-term as a homeowner is to their investment. And you kind of touched on a little bit of it. The state regulations are fairly gray and limiting as far as rental management and registration. That's something we would study as it goes along to make a better determination. Parking, that's another, again, a study to make a determination, but it would, you see the difference in the older development pattern where these commercial and office uses are pushed way back. And I don't know that those parking lots are ever full, except for, well, maybe not even now, the day after Thanksgiving or some thing like that. So there's available land with available infrastructure that's already, so that goes to Delegate Pope's statement. Let's be more flexible. If someone comes with a great idea, let's find a way. And the best case, time is money. If we have administrative flexibility in order to make those decisions, it's already developed. It's already impervious. You've already calculated your open space as you built it years ago. So let's add another commercial footprint. Now, Asheville is looking at urban centers and nodes of commercial activity where they have just that problem, and they're going to allow that mixed use development on existing parking and paved areas, but they're also giving bonuses for affordable housing and units. So the people that work in that center or in that medical office or that complex have access to the jobs right there. And that's how they're removing cars from the street and enhancing their transportation services. So I hope I've kind of covered that for you, but any other questions?
Yes, I'm interested in knowing what was the complaint about the Airbnb. I know they're very popular now, and a lot of the homes, I believe here in Rocky Mount, has been very successful with Airbnb, and not just in Rocky Mount, but just across the state and the country. So I'm just curious to what was the complaint with the Airbnb.
I'd have to go through my email and look, and I'll share it with you when I get back. I'm happy to, but there was a complaint about Airbnb, and it may have gone to the entire council.
Well, I hope there wasn't a cue for you all to start regulating or putting barriers up for Airbnb if they're successful. I did have a question also about planning and division responses to the strategic plan for affordable housing, and it's to allow residential development in commercial zone. I have a question about, are we, or have you had many requests to allow or consider commercial in some of the historic districts? You have given us an example about Rocky Mountain Mills, which is very successful. We're glad that they're there. But some of those houses have been turned into restaurants, bars or breweries, the Optimal Center, a guest house. So are we considering that in other historic districts, residential districts?
Yeah, we would love to do that. So Joseph mentioned in the B4, it allows a little bit of that. But even outside of the B4 district, in some cases, the O&I district, we have some properties that could be adaptively reused for providing additional units. And in our definition, so Joseph highlighted, it's R6 MFA, potentially B4. If we add in other definitions, so it's clearer to those that are reviewing that we want to provide live-work units, upper floor residences, and maintain an active use on the ground floor for shops and restaurants in downtown and allow residential development like it was, right? So it's hard to get back where it was because of some of the things that have been added to any zoning code throughout the state of North Carolina. You add more and more regulations and you make it harder. And so things start pushing outwards. So yeah, we would definitely like to look into that and would ultimately seek your guidance and direction, and we could propose something for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Really just two questions. One, do we have any kind of inventory of available acreage within the city limits of Rocky Mount, not existing in a flood plain that is either owned privately or held by the city of Rocky Mount, eligible for development? Because it seems like to me that that's part of the equation that we're talking about here at some level. And then secondarily, I'd just like to hear a little bit more anecdotal information as it relates to the Greensboro receivership program, because that also seems to tie with availability of developable land. And as you craft a plan, I think that would be an important variable for us to be able to understand and work with.
Okay, for those of you that may not have heard that question, I'll clarify again. The mayor has asked about available acreage within the city of Rocky Mount, privately owned, city owned, and outside of floodplain, because we know we have history with floodplain related issues. And the other was the receivership program in Greensboro. The first question, yeah, we can easily have that. We can easily figure out, again, we would probably take, so there's a lot of vacant land, but again, you filter out the floodplain or floodplain lots that we take care of to help with floodplain regulations. And we can figure out some of the larger tracts and some of the areas that the city owns that maybe we could take advantage of now. We can easily provide that for you. The Greensboro receivership program, again, fairly new to Greensboro. I think they implemented it or adopted it last March, so right before COVID. So all that has happened. They haven't really been able to fully implement or have a good set of data. But Kelly's partner there in Greensboro, they work very close together, and that's we can follow up again with that in the future.
No other questions from council at this time.
Thank you. I just wanted to echo Hubert Pope's statement that this has been amazing. It's been a learning experience for me, and I really appreciate everybody's hard work. Being in Rocky Mount since '93, I'm just really feeling proud just sitting here listening to you all hash this out. This may seem unrelated, but kind of harking back to what I said yesterday about thinking holistically, I would just, it's not a question, it's a statement, ask that the city council, even as you're looking at housing, look at when you guys advocate or recruit businesses to come to Rocky Mount, to think connectivity, so that we bring people to the city that are employing people with a better than living wage. So I think back to an NPR article I read about Amazon in some market that they're in now being lauded for devoting $2 million to affordable housing. And I just had to laugh at this huge, the richest company on the planet coming into a market and barely paying people with horrible working conditions. And now after the fact, talking about, well, we're doing something with affordable housing. It's like putting a Band-Aid on an aneurysm. And you would think it would be self-evident, but it's so many communities that have the same problem. Look at Asheville. They know they have a housing profit. They know that their workers are all just minimum wage, living off tips, and they're not recruiting, or maybe they are recruiting, I don't know, but they haven't been successful in getting corporations here that are shareholder-based, stakeholder-based, my bad, instead of shareholder-based. And so I don't know if anybody noticed, like on the tour, that company that the owners had sold to the workers. I mean, that's the kind of forward-thinking people that we need building jobs and opportunities in Rocky Mount so that we don't have this vicious cycle of constantly looking for affordable housing because housing prices are through the roof, but pay remains stagnant. So that's just my statement, and thanks.
Thank you. No other questions at this time, Dr. Bass?
Yeah, unmute, that's the unmute. Development services seems to me to be a very exciting space in which to continue the implementation of the strategic plan. I think you all outlined some very specific recommendations that the council will need to consider. And I think that those recommendations are inviting the city to take a growth mindset, to really approach the issue of housing in a new way. And that's both important, but it also has challenges, because as one of the council folks said, people who have been used to things being a certain way may have initially reactions to the change. So the question of how to present the information will be critical for the council. I thought that there were many specifics in the information that linked to the strategic plan, and I'm excited to think about how to support the council in narrowing down. I was aware of feeling a bit of, and I don't know if any of you felt it, a bit of there's a lot on the plate, and there's a lot of information, and there are a lot of options. And so figuring out how to be as strategic as possible, and also taking that long-term view. I think 10 years, thinking long-term and short-term will be important. I also heard from the council some specific actions that folks want considered around the issue of of using housing as a source of wealth creation, as we had talked about yesterday. I heard some requests for more information about, but you're getting more specific about what information you need, which is what we're going to try to capture what we hear about that. And I also just want to affirm the idea of continuing to think holistically about housing as one symptom of inequity that has a lot of different dimensions. Okay? That's what I'm thinking about for now.
Thank you, Dr. Bass.
Dr. Andrew, you're going to give any actions that you listed at this point, or do you want to also?
I got one question I just thought about. Y'all, just bear with me. Community code, Mr. Kelly Cook. When you are out on, I guess your assignments, looking at different violations, when you see other things that have not been called to your attention, but you see those things such as trash, piles of trash, furniture, and just like overgrown trees, a lot of vegetation. Do you all report that to Public Works to clean those up?
So as you're aware, the question was when the inspectors are canvassing their assigned territories within the city, their assigned geographic areas within the city, part of their responsibilities on a daily basis when they're out in these neighborhoods are to look for exactly the things that you speak of. Trash and debris on private property is a public nuisance. Overgrowth is a public nuisance, as it creates harborages for vermin, rodents, mosquitoes, etc. It also creates a safety issue when we have abandoned houses and you've got overgrowth covering the front porch. Creates a hangout area, and we've addressed these throughout the city. These are all areas of responsibility the community code has under their purview. And as you know, we share a building with environmental services. When their route coordinators are out on a daily basis monitoring that week's pickups, they will communicate with us directly when there's what we call a clean out, where somebody has vacated a property and basically piled everything that's and the house out at the curb. Because as you know, the solid waste pickup by the city is billed through the utility bill. And typically, if a property is left vacant, there's no longer a utility account there. So environmental services will either act and pick up the materials themselves, or they'll notify us, in which case we issue a nuisance notice. Now, given the fact that a nuisance notice requires a compliance period, in other words, we issue a notice and we have to allow for 10 days for the responsible party to clean it up. It doesn't work when you've got a pile of trash living at the curb for 10 days. That's not going to work for anybody. We do have an ordinance that is a public nuisance in the right-of-way, which allows the city to pick that material up as soon as we issue the notice on it without prior notice to the responsible party. We use this quite frequently in the case of cleanouts so that the stuff doesn't get strewn all over the streets. We also use it very frequently in those cases where there are illegal dumps, which are becoming an increasing problem throughout the city, where materials are being moved from one location and in the middle of the night they show up in the front yard of a vacant property in a neighborhood somewhere. So we're using it for that. Those are very evident and easy to spot. So we address those in that manner. But yes, all of that falls under community code. Hope I answered your question, sir.
Thank you.
I have one step back, if I could. As we look at this increasing problem, we do see it a lot. I wonder, is it because of landfill prices for dumping have gone up and people not having the resources to take that stuff to the landfill? And that's just a statement. The other one is when we talk about, and I know from my area, is landlords that evict people and dump stuff on the streets. And those houses. But the other one is that when we talk about most of these properties being mostly in the south side of the Edgecombe side of Rocky Mount, I would like for us, Madam Manager, to look at the historical process of, and when I talk to a lot of people, say, I remember growing up in this community, but leaving that community, and when those community was left, those houses did not become home ownership by the people that moved into those houses. And at the same time, the code violation was not enforced as rigorously on those rental properties as it would have been as when it was home ownership. And because of that historical data, and because of working poor, those houses have been totally denied. And I like to, when we look at that we look at the historical data as well. When we look at the people that stand in them and their ability now to bring that property up to code when it have been denied by both the owner and the codes for many years. And I see that a lot in my ward. I see it a lot. And Andre and I talk about it a lot. So if we could look at that as a both and process, and that's just a statement I want to make.
Well, this is for the city manager. We had asked that we would change the policy if the house or the dwelling does not have utilities, that they would not pick up trash in front of the house. Because it doesn't have utility, it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be picked up. I think that's an old policy. But what we are seeing in the older neighborhoods, the fragile neighborhoods, is a lot of, like Councilmember Joyner just mentioned, when renters are evicted, you see it every other day, just piles and piles of clothes, old furniture, what have you, trash cans that's on the side that's filled to the capacity. Sometimes they're not picked up from the sanitation department, Public Works, because the house is vacant. You see a lot of debris on the streets, the sidewalks. I can tell you one right now on the corner of Davis and Smith, a pile of just junk that's been there almost longer than 6 or 7 months. And you just see it throughout this city, especially in South Rocky Mount, Little Raleigh, Crosstown, where it's predominantly African American. And it seems like it should be a concentrated effort with Community Code and Public Works Department when they see those things, is to, again, report it and to pick that stuff up. But if you drive throughout the city, especially within the central city, you see a lot of this every other day. And so we want to clean it up so people can, quality of life can be better.
Yes.
But that's a real major problem. Just a comment.
Thank you.
Thank you all for that robust discussion in the form of following up on the action items we heard. There were several, but I do want to highlight, recap. If I missed anything, I'm sure you guys have it covered as I saw you taking notes. First of all, thank you for the Rocky Mount experience, Will, Kelly, and Joseph. What I heard in your final presentation is an overview of what you call recommendation and a proposal from you. So I imagine that piece would be included, Madam City Manager, in the follow-up that you committed to for the May meeting of the whole. The actions specifically from this room and city council members were around requests for transit usage details. It was to focus on the benefits that, well, looking at things from an economic development perspective and a focus of benefits around Airbnb and or other rental/mixed-use communities, particularly with live-work units that we'll address, as well as to look at and to assess and report inventory available in terms of acreage was another action. To further look into the Greensboro receivership program. And then the last piece was connected around reviewing the historical process of bringing some of these communities up to code, particularly with looking at quality of life around removal of trash and debris, and particularly in the communities or homes that may not have utilities connected at that time. I believe I covered the highlights. Wonderful. With that said, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you so much for discussion. That said, we are at time for break, and we will take a break. How long?
15 minutes, if everyone can agree. That should help us get back on track so that our next speaker can catch us back up so we can focus on ending on time, if that's your pleasure, sir.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.